Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lauren Kirk with PQA. Just letting everybody get into the webinar here and get settled. We'll start around 1:02. We'll get started with the webinar. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Lauren Kirk, the Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships here with the Pharmacy Quality Alliance. I'm thrilled to be here today in order to walk everyone through and host this panel as we walk everyone through the next phase to advance the quality measurement of oral anti-cancer medication use. Over the last few years, PQA has committed to an oncology initiative. And what we'll do today is discuss the first phase of that initiative that has been completed, and then also orient you to the next phase. And while doing that, bringing in a number of different experts to that process and introduce you to those folks. So webinar logistics here, we're going to have you send us your questions. At the end of the session, we will have a question and answer session, and we want to hear from you all. So please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to send us your questions throughout today's presentation. You do not have to wait until the end to send us your questions. So send them throughout today's presentation. Today's forum is being recorded, and the copy of the slides and the recording will be made available to PQA members within a week. And then again, following this webinar presentation, there'll be an opportunity for you to provide us to get your feedback. So a quick survey will launch at the end of the webinar as we sign out from this. So as I mentioned, we have a number of different speakers on today's call that will walk us through what's been done by PQA for our oncology initiative and what's coming up. Our speakers today and our presenters today are Ms. Melissa Castora-Binkley of the Pharmacy Quality Alliance, Neil Dave of Texas Oncology, Natasha Kristovova of Florida Cancer Specialists and Research Institute, and Steve Kogot of University of Rhode Island. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Melissa to start us off as she speaks to us about what PQA has done and will continue to do in oncology. To you, Melissa.
Thanks so much, Lauren. There's been dramatic growth in the number of oral anti-cancer medications available. At least 122 were approved by the FDA when we started this work, and many more on the way. The quality of using these medications is very important as it has a big impact on patient outcomes. And it comes with unique challenges, and one of those is that it's managed outside of the care team in one's own home. But that is just one unique challenge. There are many in this space that create barriers to measurement. I do want to acknowledge that we are not the first ones that have highlighted the quality issues related to oral anti-cancer medication use, but we do intend to make progress towards developing a meaningful measure to assess quality. PQA's Quality Innovation and Research Center is a strategic initiative to accelerate progress in medication use. Quality measurement needs today are very complex, more complex than ever, in fact, and it requires multiple phases of expertise and efforts. And Quirk enables this long arc from an idea to an innovative solution. So through Quirk, which is what we call it, the Quality Innovation and Research Initiative for Oncology began in 2022. To begin our quality initiative, our Quirk team reviewed the existing literature and existing measures related to oncology by conducting an environmental scan. We convened a 3-part workshop series, and we developed a consensus report. and I'll walk through each of these in the following slides. We identified 8 quality issues related to oral anti-cancer medication use. These were identified from our literature review and our environmental scan. On the slide, they're presented here in alphabetical order to not suggest any level of importance yet at this point. I do want to share with you the focus of our environmental scan, because you may be thinking that there are quality issues that aren't represented here. We focused on the quality issues that have the highest potential for measured development in the near term and implementation into a national accountability program for medication use in adult populations. The pediatric population, individuals receiving hospice care, and patients receiving inpatient treatment were considered out of scope. In addition, any articles that evaluated comparative effectiveness of oral anti-cancer medications, cost implications of oral anti-cancer medication use, and those that examine patient-reported outcomes and quality of life were excluded from our focus. Now, this is the same list that you saw, but what I do want to point out is that a few of these quality issues can be addressed through other ongoing medication management-related activities and tools, such as comprehensive medication reviews, targeted medication reviews, through medication therapy management programs, which is in fact another area that PQA is focused on. After identifying the quality issues, we brought together 23 experts to share their perspectives in late 2022 and early 2023. The experts were asked to prioritize oral anti-cancer medication quality research and measurement opportunities. We had 3 patients with lived experience and subject matter experts who represented pharmacy, health plans, healthcare providers, biopharmaceutical companies, associations, and academia. We held 3 workshops in order to achieve our goal. The next steps for oral anti-cancer medication use quality. The first workshop was held virtually, and we reviewed measure fundamentals and had a prioritization exercise. The second workshop was held in person with the objective to further prioritize health plan and pharmacy measure concepts for potential development. Discussions were specific to health plans and pharmacy measurement based on the environmental scan findings and in alignment with PQA's mission and staff expertise and experience. The workshop focused on feasibility and usability of measure concepts, as well as key methodological considerations for measurement and important clinical considerations. And finally, the third workshop was held online and focused on deeper dives into the 2 top prioritized concepts. So let's now take a look at what those were. First, we have adherence or persistence to oral anti-cancer medications, prioritized and specific to the health plan level of measurement. This concept was described as a method of assessing that individuals have taken their oral anti-cancer medications as prescribed over a given period of time. As it sounds, this should be considered at the conceptual level right now, not the technical level. The thresholds for defining adherence or persistence to oral anti-cancer medications are something that needs to be defined still. Advisors voiced opinions related to the potential shortcomings of proportion of days covered methodology, noting the complexity of regimens in this area, the variability of how oral anti-cancer medications are used, and intentional drug withholds. Time to treatment was the other concept prioritized through this workshop. The time to treatment concept was specific for pharmacy level measurement. On this slide, we show the concept at the very top in lime green. If you focus on the middle set of bluish purplish boxes, you'll see a continuum of care representing the time from when a prescription was written to it being received at the pharmacy, having the prescription ready for pickup or delivery, the medication being sold or picked up from the pharmacy or delivered to one's home, and finally, ultimately, the patient taking the medication. We have 2 related measures to time to treatment, which are shown here. One, the specialty pharmacy turnaround time, which really focuses on the 2 most actionable steps by the pharmacy, and that is the time from when it's received to when it's ready for pickup. The other measure concept currently in development is specialty pharmacy prescription abandonment rate, which captures that next step, which is whether the prescription was actually picked up or delivered. These two concepts capture what is in the pharmacy's direct control. Having control or the ability to affect change is a best practice when specifying quality measures. So with adherence or persistence being the top quality priority, we have now embarked on our next phase of this quality innovation and research initiative for oncology. Most, if not all, adherence or persistence measures have had a validated methodology for which to leverage or adapt for a particular area or condition. Oncology, however, does not have an established methodology for which to build a measure. We therefore cannot jump straight into measurement. We will have to take a multi-phased approach that requires a few steps before formal measure development can occur. We're currently at the phase of identifying methodologies for adherence or persistence to oral anti-cancer medications, as shown in the second box from the left. To be clear, we are in the proposal stage right now, and we hope to launch an active project by the end of this year or early 2025. Following that work, we will then focus on developing a novel methodology for adherence or persistence, and we'll need to validate this methodology against important and meaningful outcomes. So assuming that all signals from these early efforts are a go, we will then propose to move into measure development. Now let's take a closer look at this phase of the initiative. This phase has 4 main objectives. 1, we want to create a database of oral anti-cancer medications and their clinical attributes. We also need to establish a methodological framework for measuring adherence or persistence. The whole way through, we plan to consult subject matter experts and get their important input, and then finally identify oral anti-cancer medication groupings that we can develop a methodology for. So let's discuss each of these in a bit more detail. This slide depicts an example of what we need to do for our first objective, which is to create the oral anti-cancer medication database. We will utilize subject matter expertise, especially clinical expertise, and we'll combine this with PQA's measurement expertise to gather disparate information and aggregate this into a standardized format that will eventually be utilized in statistical analyses. While much of this information exists, we must pull it all together into one source. We must identify the information that is most crucial for quality measurement and ensure clinical relevancy, and do so in a structured, standardized method. Concurrently, we plan to create a framework of methodological considerations for measuring adherence or persistence. We will dive into the literature to determine various ways that this has been done across disease states and conditions. We are interested in casting a broad net to find innovative and unique methods that have been used to evaluate adherence or persistence in ways that address barriers to the standard approaches that many of us are familiar with. This framework will also help to inform the oral anti-cancer medication attributes that will be sourced and used in the database. Let's see how all this information from these first 2 objectives will be used together. The blue box represents the information we've gathered in Objective 1 to create an oral anti-cancer medication database with those important clinical attributes. We will take that information and translate it to methodological considerations and end up with a series of zeros and ones that can be used for analytics. Keep in mind, these zeros and ones will be carefully selected with clinical subject matter expertise and measurement expertise to curate a database to help us point to oral anti-cancer medications that lend themselves to measurement. So how exactly will we do that? We plan to utilize a combined qualitative-quantitative approach, leveraging the power of data that we've curated. We will utilize a statistical method to group oral anti-cancer medications into mutually exhaustive groupings, where those within the groupings are more similar to those that are in other groupings. Because we've created the variables to be meaningful for measurement, these groupings will show us which oral anti-cancer medications might be amenable to different approaches. For example, maybe a modified PDC approach, just for example. We may have a group of oral anti-cancer medications that don't seem appropriate for measurement at all because of their unique characteristics and considerations. Then we anticipate that most of the oral anti-cancer medications will fall into one or more groupings that require one or more novel methodologies. And how will we know if we need more than one novel methodology? The underlying variables that determine the groupings are measurement relevant concepts. So we'll be able to understand exactly what the novel methodology or methodologies will need to address by analyzing the groupings. We expect this to be an iterative process. Clinical subject matter experts will weigh in to make refinements and changes to the groupings. It is as important for these groupings to make sense for measurement as they should from a clinical standpoint. With the back and forth exchange from the subject matter experts, we expect this project to produce recommendations for methodologies to measure adherence or persistence to oral anti-cancer medications. We expect this project to last 2 years. The first year is the creation of the database and the framework and getting this information combined and ready in a standardized format for analysis. And the second year is all about that analysis and the refinement of it to produce the recommendations. It's really important for us to emphasize that this is groundbreaking work. We're not saving lives, but this is groundbreaking work. We've heard others say that it can't even be done, but we believe in taking the initial research and data-driven steps that haven't been done yet and guide these with clinical subject matter experts to lay that foundational groundwork that's needed for measuring adherence or persistence to oral anti-cancer medications. We recognize the challenges that we'll face when doing this. We understand the variation and complexity in treatment and the variable dosing and switching that occurs. These are all issues that pose potential barriers to standardized measurement. We plan to address these through the efforts described here, that is, grouping the oral anti-cancer medications into like categories and utilizing clinical subject matter experts to validate and guide the work. In later stages, we expect to pull in multiple data sources, such as claims, medical records, and other clinical data sources to create and validate the novel methodology. The goal of an adherence or persistence measure for oral anti-cancer medications is not just merely to add another burden to an already strained system. A measure of this type can go way beyond a patient's receipt of medication. A measure can help break down existing barriers that impacts patients on their healthcare journey. It can stimulate efforts related to affordability, access, foster innovation and treatment toxicity and complexity, and provide an opportunity for greater focus on the whole person, their comorbidities, burden of illness, and patient health beliefs. Lauren, over to you.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and really for reviewing the incredible work that that's been done by PQA thus far. It's been made possible. That first phase has been made possible by the supporters that you see here. And aside from adding the thanks from Melissa to making that work possible, we want to make sure that that this work is able to continue. And so we will be seeking the support from organizations, similar organizations, for the second phase of the work here. And we'll be looking for those stakeholders to not only support the initiative, but also be involved in the research as Melissa has mentioned. So with that, and summarizing the work that's been done and that has that we're looking to continue to do, we want to hear from you all. What questions do you all have for us related to what's been done and what we are looking to do? Please submit them those questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And we'll go ahead and get our panelists set up here in order to discuss the current work with them as that we're looking to do. So look like they're coming on camera here. I got Natasha, Neil, Steve, and Melissa. So I have my entire panel here. Thank you all very much for joining the webinar today. Let's get started. So we've heard briefly from Melissa, but let's go around the panel here. And if you all will briefly introduce yourself and tell us, aside from participating in phase 1 of the work, how you all are working with oral anti-cancer medications and looking to improve their quality. So let's start with Steve here.
Great, thanks. Hi, everybody. Pleasure to be with you today. I'm a professor at the University of Rhode Island College of Pharmacy, where I teach in the areas of managed care, pharmacy, pharmacoeconomics, and medication outcomes research. Medication adherence has been a consistent thread of my research, including recent studies looking at patient adherence with oral anti-cancer medications. I've also been a long-standing fan of PQA. I attended the kickoff meeting back in 2006 and really so happy to remain involved now as an advisory member of the work and helping with this effort as well. I was co-chair of the PQA convened sessions on oral oncology drugs. So it's really exciting to be coming out of those meetings with some important lessons learned and a plan for the next phase of this work.
Excellent. Natasha.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending today. It's my pleasure to be here. So what is my history? I'm a director of pharmacy clinical services with RX2Go Pharmacy, Florida cancer specialist. I operate in oral oncology space only. We do have exposure to IVs, but that's my focus. It has been my focus for the last so many years on adherence and persistence in therapy. I really want to cover that a little bit more in future discussions. We actually have published 2 articles around adherence and persistence in therapy, and one was about afatinib, pharmacist-led patient management on afatinib. That's an old drug we all know about. Another one was in an American Journal of Managed Care, where it was a call to action to create this new metrics. And thank you for PQA picking up on this topic. So my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And then rounding us out, Neil.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. My name is Neil Deve. I'm the Executive Director of Pharmacy for Texas Oncology. I got involved with PQA really from my predecessor, Jim Schwartz. He's been a great proponent of PQA as soon as he learned about the organization and really brought it to Texas Oncology and our the pharmacy staff and our physicians. As an oncology-focused organization, we dispense a lot of oral oncolytics, and we have throughout the year. We've been doing this for over 25 years, even when there were very few oral oncolytics out there. We are very interested in this because there aren't any really benchmarks or metrics for cancer patients. All the benchmarks are focused around other drug classes, and they somehow get applied to our patients. But the metrics that we're trying to put out here, that PQA is trying to put out here, are very patient-centered. And they actually do impact patients, and they can actually give you an idea of how you are performing as a pharmacy. And I think that's so important and missing. And that's why we're all really involved in this. And that's why Texas Oncology is involved. We really want to make sure that we are really all raising the bar of care for our patients and finding ways that we can do that in a standardized way. So appreciate you having me on the panel.
Absolutely. Happy to have you all here, and now that we know one another, let's ask the tough questions. Let's ask the questions here. So Steve, you mentioned you were a co-chair here. So as a co-chair of the first phase of the work, how do you think the approach that PQA is taking for the second phase will satisfy the challenges of the first phase?
Yeah, that's a really important question, Lauren. Thanks. As Melissa pointed out, one thing that was really clear from the convened sessions was that this is an extremely complex topic, and conventional approaches to adherence measurement aren't going to be feasible or maybe even valid. And so, PQA is taking the insights that were obtained from those sessions, which came from patients, clinical experts, methodologists, and is going to move forward to find the opportunities where measurement can align with the complexities of oral anti-cancer medication use, but doing so using an empiric approach. Now, it's a little daunting not knowing for sure what the process will yield. A lot of times we start these measure development efforts with, some fairly well-baked notions of how the measure will be defined, but that approach just isn't workable for this class of medication. So I think carrying forward the insights from the convened sessions while also starting to classify the various attributes of oral anti-cancer medications and the available measurement methods, that's really the important next step that needs to be taken to get to that end goal that Melissa stated, which really is having a measure that can help promote quality of cancer care.
So understanding that having that measure to promote quality cancer care there. So Natasha, as a clinician, what about this work in PEER in phase 2 will be meaningful to both patients and providers?
Well, I think Neil kind of covered what he didn't have enough time yet, but I know he'll speak about this. I agree with him, but this is really important for us to understand how we perform, because our focus is on the patient care, and patients in cancer, they're special. So this is not cardiology when you put patients on antihypertensive and let them go, you see them in 3 months. This is continuously following this patient. So it is really patient focused. And for prescribers, also, they want to see the outcomes that beneficial for patient, not just for pharmacy, right? But then we have contracts with payers. They also look at the quality performance. How do you perform in the market? Should we give you our patients? Are you taking care of our patients that we're going to give you? Same with pharma companies, they're looking at that too. Are you the pharmacy that I want to give the drug to you because we care about patients? They care about the drug, that they also care about their patients. So it's important not just to two entities, it's important to all stakeholders. Hopefully I answered your question, but Neil, feel free to add.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I agree. It's so important to us. I kind of mentioned this a little bit. It's if we don't put these metrics out there and have a standard way to measure them, then we're all going to be measuring ourselves, and we're all going to figure out a way to, say, hey, we got the best adherence, hey, we got the best persistency. But if you can do this in a way that's systematic, we can really set the bar and raise the bar for our patients. And I think that's very important. That's important not only to us, but it's important to our physicians. How many times do they say, do I get a call saying I prescribed a drug to a patient and they never received it and they're here for their next appointment? The time to fill metric should help kind of address some of that. The same thing with persistency. We know there all the drugs that get approved, as drugs are going through the approval process, they're measuring the max dose that a patient can really tolerate versus the most efficacious dose, maybe, and it could be lower. And so we all know that, and we see this in the trials, and our physicians see it. And so there's really a need for interventions to make sure our patients can get to that point where they are taking their meds past even, if they get to a 90-day point or whatever chalk line we draw, they do better after that because they're at a dose that makes sense for them. And so that's how you can really affect the score and really look at drugs and individual basis and how you can affect them based on what was the dose that patients were actually taking in the trial. Not the dose that's indicated, but what was the dose that most of the patients could tolerate and still have an efficacious response. And so many of our TKIs are like that.
Yeah, Lauren, I just want to add something to Neil's discussion. So we just really need to define what persistency, adherence and persistency is in oncology, right? So we cannot measure adherence persistence the same way as we do in cardiology and the other specialties, because we're talking about not just black and white. There's a lot of gray area in oncology. And believe it or not, I decided to check at the package insert for anti-diabetic drug versus oncology drug, TKI. there's no section that talks about those interruptions, those holds, or and those changes it's appropriate. We know that, but interruptions, holds, it's not going to be in package insert for anti-diabetic. But if you look at any TKI, it's always discussed. It's always part of the trial. It's always the part of the clinical outcomes in clinical trials. So persistency on therapy for oncology drugs is probably more important, right? We kind of want to measure that, how long patient stays on therapy on oncology drug, because if you look at clinical trial, we probably want to kind of get to that point with our patients. And we did that with our pharmacy because we're a hands-on pharmacy. We're a white glove service pharmacy. And we did health outcome studies for a lot of these drugs. So we find our pharmacy performance on the higher level. But how do you measure that? There's so many different drugs, so many cancers, almost 200 cancers. So, and a lot of drugs as well. Very difficult task.
Well, Natasha, I mean, you brought up, there's so many different drugs, there's so many different cancers, and there, as we identified in the environmental scan, that there's a number of different quality issues that in some ways aren't really related to the drugs, aren't really related to persistence and adherence. So, I mean, those included dosing errors, drug interactions, toxicity monitoring and management. So I'm curious, I don't want to sideline those. How are you, as a clinician and a provider, how are you all addressing those quality issues that aren't necessarily addressed or won't necessarily be addressed by an adherence or persistence measure?
Neil, you want to start? Because it's Neil and I
Yeah.
back and forth.
Yeah, no, yeah, sure. Like, I think you have to have a process in place to address, and all of these things actually play into your final persistency measure, whatever that line of chalk that we draw is going to be. Like, if you don't have the toxicity management, if you don't have the follow-up, if you don't have consistent like reach out or consistent reach out, and we're trying to do this with ePros, and those are big right now, but there's also challenges with that. People have fatigue with ePro, electronically sending back that I'm doing okay, or I'm having this kind of issue. So there's challenges with that too. There's going to be challenges with whatever we implement, but I think you have to have a program to try to ensure our patients get through they get their drug on time so they can start when they need it. And then two, both of these measures make a lot of sense. First part, make sure patients get their drug on time. Second part, make sure their persistency is there, adherence and persistency is there. But yeah, so from a standpoint of what we're doing, you have to do all these things that they kind of go into that final metric of persistency, and that's how you're going to affect it. We've done this, and I know Natasha's probably done this too, and a lot of community oncology places or even oncology clinics have done this across the board. But we'll look at, like, to what my point earlier was, when you look at the way these drugs are developed and the dosing that comes out, you really do understand that, hey, this is really high, and some of these drug companies have done studies after the fact, real world studies, or even studies ongoing, where they end up using half or a third of the dose that they actually approved, or a fourth of the dose that they were actually approved for. And so we internally look at this and say, okay, how do we affect, if someone's not familiar with that cancer, or they don't have a ton of patients on it, so they don't necessarily know the last trial that had the updated dosing, and they go off the package insert dosing, how do we make sure that we address that from a pharmacy standpoint? And those types of initiatives have the effect on the persistency. So you may not have like a measure on how many times you make interventions, but that intervention that you make to say, okay, you actually dose this at the higher package insert dose, we really need to back off quite a bit, and let's start patients lower and let's ramp up, and you'll get that patient past that mark and have a much more successful outcome. Those are the things that we really need to focus on to affect that metric, and that's kind of, I think, how we're trying to do this from our organization. But I think it makes sense across the board to try to implement this. Natasha, sorry, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add to it.
I agree with everything you said. We do exactly the same thing, because that's what we do as pharmacists. We're dedicated to our patients. we never need to forget about also financial toxicities. So when we put patients on these drugs, the dose optimization, what Neil just mentioned, there's a new initiative coming from FDA Optimus, which is actually built this dose optimization in the clinical trials, which is kind of new. And we see that Neil said that, you know, Gelatref, we start with the 40 milligram, now it's 30 milligram. It's an older drug, but we can have so many examples of that. But don't ever forget, there's a waste that we do not follow these patients appropriately every 2 weeks. The first 3 months is crucial because this is when the dose optimization happens in real world. So we need to call patient. We need to find out, are you on the same dose? Did the dose change? Do you tolerate? And then go back to physician and say, hey, we need a new prescription. We need to reduce the dose. That's our clinician responsibility to do this for a patient. And that affects their copays, that affects their foundation usage. So there's a lot of things we can do. It's very complex. Oncology is not simple. It's just like I said, it's very complex. It's a lot of gray area, but we need to measure everything. That's what we wrote about that in our paper. We measure all of this. But what I want to say is we really need to start publish best practices. We can create all of these metrics. We can start measuring it, but how are people going to implement that? We need to help people to implement that. We need to, and that's on different levels. Like it's not just the pharmacy has all these technologies and resources, but there's smaller pharmacies who want to do the same thing. I know I'm talking a lot, sorry.
No worries at all. You're adding quite a bit of valuable information here. And so I hear you when you're saying publishing those best practices. I'm hearing a call to kind of measure everything. And while measure everything isn't necessarily possible, I know Steve has done some work as it relates to the measuring or evaluating short-term healthcare utilization and how that is directly associated with adherence to oral anti-cancer medications. So Steve, can you share more about kind of the association and the link between those two items there?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Thanks, Lauren. And this conversation is really just illuminating all of the complexities that Melissa had mentioned in her presentation, not only with regard to the continuum of medication use, but thinking about different entities being measured, whether we're talking about health plans or maybe at a provider group level, and then the data sources that are available, for measurement. So there's, it's like more than just three-dimensional chess. There's, so much complexity inherent in this. But sure, we've done some research at our group at the University of Rhode Island. One of our team studies, led by my colleague, Dr. Ami Bias, looked at national representative commercial insurer data and looked at adherence with anti-cancer medications across a range of factors. And, of course, there's no surprise, we found a relationship between out-of-pocket costs and poorer medication adherence. So, that financial toxicity piece was evident in looking at patterns of medication use and out-of-pocket costs for patients. And, that was across 10 different cancer types. And for some cancer types, the relationship was really substantial, like 3 times more likely to be non-adherent if you had the highest levels of out-of-pocket spending. So, so that piece is definitely there. But, we also identified that, lots of other factors also were associated with poor adherence. And so we're all really happy that the Inflation Reduction Act has put a cap on patient out-of-pocket spending in Medicare Part D, and it'll be even a lower out-of-pocket cap next year and going forward. But at least some of the data that we've looked at suggests that, taking away that affordability piece isn't going to completely solve the problem. So it, tells us that, lots of other factors contribute to poor adherence. Some of the things that we identified were having, hospitalization during the adherence measurement period. Race was associated with poorer adherence for some cancer types, and myriad other factors as well. So on the utilization piece, we also did look to see if adherence with oral anti-cancer medication was associated with healthcare utilization, at least during the treatment initiation phase, and didn't find a relationship there. So that doesn't mean that over the longer term, utilization patterns may also be similar. I suspect that they're not, but that's not something we could discuss from the data that we looked at.
Excellent.
Steve,
So
Steve,
before,
sorry, I was going to say that's a
Right,
great point. Like, sorry, Lauren. Once the IRA, if you're able to reduce the out of pocket, it's like almost like you're playing a game. You kind of push down on the financial toxicity, and something else is going to pop up and have more high value. And we kind of see that too when we look at, especially our time to treatment data, and we're looking at, okay, what's actually causing patients not to start treatment on time. That's a great point.
when it sounds like there's multiple points of focus that need to be dealt with at the same time. So then Neil, to you, kind of when you're looking at the practices that are needed in order to in anticipation of any type of measurement, what are the practices that you are going to need to be focused on? Where are those high priority practices?
Yeah, so if you're going to be measured on these, you really do need to look at your own. You need to be able to, if this is going to be a health plan measurement, or you really do need to look at how your own data and try to measure yourself and what's going on. Natasha touched on this earlier. We all kind of touched on this. The way oral anti-cancer medications are taken, there's so many dose interruptions and things that cause you to maybe look like you're non-adherent. And so understanding what may be causing that, like why you have a low adherence score, if it's just looking at claims data, is really important. And so maybe you're supposed to have a lower adherence rate because the doctor, that was the plan for the physician, to slowly ramp up, or maybe they told the patient to stop taking it for a week or 2 weeks. And so there's so many different, I think you have to understand your own practice and your own medications and your own patients and how these medications are being prescribed and taken as these measurements get put, are implemented. And that way you can have a better understanding of, oh, okay, it looks like I'm only, my 70%, my patient's only 60 to 70% adherent or persistent. And so then you have to understand what that actually means. And then how do you affect that adherence to get to the higher level of persistency? And so that's one really big area. Whenever you have any sort of data that comes out, you really have to understand what it's saying, what it means, what are the limitations. That way you can actually make a change and a difference to improve your own pharmacy and improve the care that you're giving to your patients.
Lauren, I'll be quick. I know we probably need to move on, but I want to add, the great idea, stratification by risk factors, grouping these drugs into different groups, like acute leukemia, AML is completely different population of patients than CML. So very good idea.
Yep.
So I want to pivot to some extent to return our focus more specifically on phase 2 of PQA's work here, and really direct this towards Melissa. So Melissa, you mentioned there's a lot of OAMs, oral anti-cancer medications, and a lot of them have different characteristics as described by the panel here, and how they're being managed and so many different aspects of them here. So is it possible that PQA is going to have to eventually develop multiple adherence or persistence measures in parallel to align with the way that these OAMs are being used?
That's exactly right. And that's the purpose of creating these groupings. We know that there's so much variation that we can't just take all these medications and assume that one approach will work for all of them. And so it's really important for us to take a look to build this data that we plan on doing in this phase. It's going to be clinically focused and measurement focused, and that combination is going to be very powerful to help us understand if we need more than one methodology. We certainly don't want to put out a whole bunch of measures that are just slightly different and very burdensome. This is like the difference between measuring adherence to oral diabetic medications versus insulin. Those things can't be done together. So our groupings here will help us understand how the different considerations align within the medications. And then we can understand whether we need just one novel methodology that will take care of it all, or if we might need more than one. So that is what we're looking to discover here.
So I'm hearing from you that this work is creating groupings based on the different characteristics. So we're not developing methods in this particular phase, correct?
No, I know that, we just want to jump right into it and get to it already. But as we talked about the need for what we're considering our QUIRC, our Quality Innovation Research Center, there's so much work that needs to be done before we can jump into that. Having a measure that's standardized, that everybody can participate in, and that's evidence-based, takes time to build the evidence to do so. And so we have to take these initial steps. We don't want to put something out there that people end up being held accountable to that can't be justified through the evidence and the association with the outcomes. So we do have to take some time. Unfortunately, measurement is not something that is a quick endeavor. So this phase will not create the method, but it will set us up to jump right into that creation in the next phase.
So Melissa, you mentioned QUIRC a few times here, and at the risk of being self-promoting or I guess PQA promoting here, tell us what is the PQA Quality Innovation and Research Center?
Yeah, sure. I can speak to that a little bit more. One way we like to think about it is talking about scope, scale, and sophistication. So there's no more low-hanging fruit in measurement. I've been in this space building national quality measures for over 10 years, and it's changed drastically in that time frame. Where we're at now is complex. The things that are left over that need measures, it's not easy to do. It's a bigger scope, it's a larger scale, and it requires a lot more sophistication. And that usually means a lot more time. So what we're trying to do is understand the need and create those building blocks to get to the solution.
So, Steve, you've been involved with the work of QUIRC, and from an advisory committee level, while Neil and Natasha have absolutely participated in the work from the work that is being done as phase 1 of oncology. You've participated as a advisory committee member. What does QUIRC mean to you? What does the Quality Innovation Research Center mean to you, and what its goals are?
Thanks, Lauren. Sure, I'd be glad to talk about that. Yeah, I've been participating with the QUIRC for about a year, and honestly, been impressed by the attention that PQA places on incorporating the guidance of stakeholders in the field. And that I in QUIRC, I think it's probably the most important word, which is innovation. And through that stakeholder-driven process and having people working so collaboratively with PQA leadership really ensures that PQA can stay on top of new developments and extend and adapt those innovations into its work. So I think it's a great model for advancement and to accelerate PQA's impact and effectiveness. I've really been impressed.
Excellent. So we have about 10 minutes left here. And I want to pivot to the questions that we received. They've been flooding in, so we'll probably maximize the rest of the time here. And so the first question is for Steve. We'll keep you talking, Steve. So in your recently published JMCP article, you talked about measuring adherence to OAMs. How did you measure that? What modifications were made to the proportion of days covered method, and what are the limitations of your approach? Tell us more. Give us some context on exactly how you were measuring the adherence there.
Yeah, wouldn't it be great if we figured it out so we don't have to do any of this work going forward, right? So we looked at treatment persistence, or the first 6 months of treatment. So when people were newly initiating an oral anti-cancer medication. And one big difference between the usual PDC methodology is we only required that they had one fill. And followed all patients that had at least one fill rather than requiring that they had 2 or more fills to assess adherence. But there's probably not enough time to go through all of the nuances of adherence measurement in our analysis. But I think sometimes, for research, certainly to get some insights about factors of influence, measurement can be at a certain standard and give us some ideas about associations that exist. But certainly for measure development and accountability, there are standards for a quality measure that will be at a much higher level. So I would say when looking at the research and research like ours, it can give us some insights about medication adherence in populations. But when we start looking at much smaller units of analysis, at the practice level, at the plan level even, we need to be much more, we need measures that are much more valid and reliable. And so that's what this PQA endeavor is striving to accomplish.
Lauren, I'm gonna, sorry, I just really quickly, measuring is awesome, wonderful, let's do it, but we can never forget that we have practices, we have large pharmacies like us dispensing 700 prescriptions a day, and we have a very small medically integrated pharmacies or standalone pharmacies. You cannot, it's hard to do that if you're a small node technology. So we always need to remember that, make something that people can do. Feasible is the word, yes.
That's an excellent point. And Natasha, you brought up, I know you participated in the exercise when we were working our way in phase 1 through looking at different measure concepts that could possibly be out there. We were very much looking at the feasibility of those concepts. And so Steve's obviously that work you've done has started to keep that at the forefront of your mind for sure as you're evaluating that adherence methodology. So another question that's come in, I'll put to Neil. So Neil, you're on the spot here. How do you see this work intersecting with anything being done at CMS or CMMI?
I'd love for this to be adopted, these quality measures to be adopted by CMS for Part D plans to replace some of the other quality star ratings and metrics that are out there for our pharmacies. That's where I would see. I'd love for a vetted metric to come out from PQA, then to be adopted by Med D plans, so that we can have a true measurement of how we're performing. Now, I don't know I don't fully know how to navigate that process and how long that would take, but I think that would be the end goal and where I'd really love to see this go.
Excellent. Any additional thoughts there from the group?
I can just add that CMS had their quality conference this week, and one of the panelists there mentioned that what gets measured gets done. And so that's something, we're thinking about here. It's not just adherence. All the interventions that go into improving adherence are going to improve patient outcomes and help address that spectrum of quality issues. So measuring just one thing, we hope will have, sort of a cascading effect. And also, I believe they mentioned wanting to not just use, but test newer measures in some of the CMMI models. And so that might be a future opportunity as well.
Excellent. All right, so a normal way a traditional way I like to wrap my panels up is to put it to our panelists here for some final thoughts. What's our final thought that you'd like to leave us with prior to us transitioning to some final announcements? So let's start with Steve, some final thoughts to wrap us up.
Sure. Well, maybe again, just to reiterate a theme from this webinar today is that this is going to be more of an involved process, and for people who are interested in how the process evolves, that there are mechanisms for continuing input, such as this webinar, and the process will continue to have opportunity for stakeholders to contribute and opine. And PQA and the rest of us participating in the effort will do our best to try and provide those updates and opportunities for input from stakeholders.
Excellent. So to Natasha for some final thoughts.
Well, yeah, so first of all, I want to thank PQA for a committee and the members as well, that when I faced payer across the table in these discussions, that was quite amazing to hear their side of the story, because we have to work with them. But this is not going to be a fast process. Melissa, you're right. We cannot just jump and do something and regret later, because that affects everybody. Whoever's listening today, it will affect you guys. So we don't want to do that fast. We need to really think through it, and you need to be stakeholders. You need to give us some ideas. So in the end, it's going to be a good result.
Do you, Neil?
Yeah. So far in the process has been very inclusive. I feel like with everybody that's involved and everybody that's a stakeholder. So I think it's in that way, I think we're going to end up with a really great product or metric at the very end of it. Again, I echo everybody's really thoughts that this is going to be very difficult and very nuanced, and I think the more feedback we have, the better. But I'm really excited to get to the next phase and start to work on this a little bit more and really get into the details and really how we're going to make this work for everybody.
All right, Melissa, rather. Melissa.
Let's do it. Let's get started. We're ready. We're ready for the challenge. And as Neil said, we can't do this without all of you that are interested and provide input. So please stay engaged with us. You'll be hearing about this for some time to come as we work through it.
Excellent. Excellent.
Perfect.
So thank you all very much for joining the panel and sharing your insights, as well as kind of discussing with us, adding some color to the next phase of PQA's work here. To wrap it up, we have a few announcements here. If we have not already let you know, here's your announcement that the 2024 PQA annual meeting is quickly approaching in Baltimore, Maryland, coming up May 14th through the 16th of 2024 here. Thrilled to have our registration numbers looking like there will be a record-breaking attendance there in Baltimore. We have quite a bit of programming already set up and ready to go, so please do find your way to the PQA website in order to register for the meeting. Get your hotel rooms prior to, or either as soon as possible. We do know that they are selling out quickly, but we look forward to seeing you there next month. Next up, I will let you know about the upcoming webinar here, the all-member webinar that's coming up. Excuse me, we're going to be talking about the measure retirement consideration that's coming up, the use of opioids from multiple providers in persons without cancer. This measure is currently up for retirement consideration. The public comment period is currently open now through April 26th. So please submit your comments for consideration on the PQA website. Following the public comment period, PQA will host an all-member webinar to review the measure, our rationale for retirement consideration, and the responses that we received during the public comment. Immediately following the close of that webinar, we will send an email to our key contacts and those voting contacts within each member organizations to receive that the ability to vote. So again, at the end of that webinar, our key voting contacts will receive a link in order to vote for or in favor or not in favor of the retirement there. Each member organization, no matter how big or small, will receive one vote. Greater than 60% of the vote of approval for retirement is required for a measure to be retired. Should the vote be in favor of retirement, the measure will be removed from the 2025 PQA measure manual. So again, go ahead and mark your calendars for the all-member webinar for sure, but all of the dates here related to the measure retirement consideration. Another announcement here we have coming up is our stakeholder advisory meetings. So mark your calendars for June 5th as for the Q2, the quarter 2 stakeholder advisory meeting, and August 14th for the Q3 or quarter 3 stakeholder advisory meeting. And finally, our next Quality Forum webinar will be July 18th, 2024 from 1 to 2. Mark your calendar on that and be on the lookout for plenty of those webinar announcements. Again, thank you all very much for joining today's webinar and learning more about the next phase to advance the quality measurement of oral anti-cancer medication use. We really appreciate you all as stakeholders and members joining us here on our webinar, but not only in the work itself. We look forward to continuing to move this groundbreaking work forward, and we'll see you in Baltimore at the PQA annual meeting. Thanks and have a great day.